The morning my parents reported me to the nursing board, I was standing in the hospital break room with a cup of coffee in my hand. I remember everything about that moment. The clock on the wall said 8:17. My coffee was still too hot to drink, and my phone had just received a message from an unknown number. Please contact the state nursing board regarding a complaint filed against your license. I read it twice, then a third time. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I had been a registered nurse for 11 years. I had never been written up for misconduct. I had never been accused of stealing medication. I had never abandoned a patient. My record was clean. So why would the nursing board be contacting me? Then I saw the second message. Complaint alleges financial misconduct, falsification of records, and misuse of patient property. My hand went cold. Patient property, financial misconduct, those weren't small accusations. Those were the kind of accusations that could destroy a nurse's career before she even had a chance to explain herself. I immediately called the number listed in the message. The woman who answered was calm and professional. She confirmed that a complaint had been filed against me. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. The complaint was submitted by someone claiming to have knowledge of your personal and professional conduct. Who? I asked. I can't disclose the identity at this stage. I closed my eyes. There were only a handful of people who knew enough about my life to make accusations like that. And one thought came into my mind. My parents. 3 weeks earlier, my grandmother had died. She had been 84 years old, and she had left me $3,500,000. Not because I asked for it, not because I expected it, because she wanted me to have it. Her will was clear. My parents received some personal belongings. My uncle received her vacation property, but the majority of her financial estate went to me. My parents had known about the will, and when they first heard the amount, my mother had stared at me across the dining table and whispered, "That can't be right." I thought she was grieving. I was wrong. She wasn't grieving the loss of her mother. She was grieving the money she thought should have been hers. For the first few days after the funeral, my parents acted strangely. My father kept asking when the inheritance would officially be transferred. My mother kept asking whether I planned to keep the money. Then, one evening, my father said something I will never forget. "You know, family money should stay in the family." I looked at him. "Dad, Grandma chose where it should go." He leaned back in his chair. She wasn't thinking clearly near the end. That sentence stayed with me, because my grandmother had been perfectly capable of making decisions. She had even told me privately that she knew my parents would be angry. She had squeezed my hand and said, "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for receiving what I deliberately gave you." At the time, I didn't understand how important those words would become. Now, sitting in that hospital break room, staring at the nursing board's message, I finally understood. This wasn't about my nursing license. It was about the $3.5 million. My parents couldn't take the inheritance from me directly, so they had found another way to pressure me. They were trying to make me afraid. Afraid of losing my career. Afraid of losing my reputation. Afraid of losing everything. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated how carefully my grandmother had prepared for this. And they had no idea what was inside the envelope she gave me 2 days before she died. My grandmother's name was Eleanor. She wasn't a wealthy woman who spent her life showing off. She lived quietly. She drove the same car for years. She bought groceries with coupons. And she never talked about money unless there was a reason. I grew up closer to her than I was to my parents. Whenever things were difficult at home, I would call her. When I graduated nursing school, she was the first person waiting outside the ceremony. When I got my first job at the hospital, she brought me a small cake. She always told me the same thing. Take care of people, but don't forget to take care of yourself. When she became sick, I visited her almost every evening. My parents visited too, but their conversations were different. They asked about her investments. They asked about her house. They asked about her accounts. I noticed it, so did Grandma. One evening, While I was helping her organize some paperwork, she looked at me and said, "Your parents have been asking questions." I tried to smile. "They're worried about you." She shook her head. "No. They're worried about what happens after me." I didn't know what to say. Then she reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a thick envelope. She placed it in my hands. "Don't open this until after I'm gone." I stared at it. "What is it?" "Protection." That was all she said. I laughed nervously. "Grandma, you're making this sound like a spy movie." She smiled. "I know my daughter. That was my mother." Grandma knew her better than anyone. She knew that my mother had spent years comparing herself to other people. She knew my father always followed her lead. And she knew money could turn disappointment into something much uglier. 2 days later, Grandma passed away peacefully. After the funeral, the lawyer read the will. When he announced that I was receiving the majority of her estate, my mother went completely silent. My father didn't say anything, but I could see the anger in his face. Later that night, my mother called me. "You knew about this?" "No. You're lying." "I didn't know the amount. You always were her favorite." I felt something inside me break. "Mom, she's gone. Can we not do this now?" She hung up. 3 days later, the nursing board contacted me. And suddenly Grandma's envelope mattered. I went home after my shift and placed it on my kitchen table. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were copies of legal documents, bank records, a letter from her attorney, and one handwritten note. I unfolded it. "My dear girl, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry." I stopped breathing for a moment. The letter continued. "If anyone tries to challenge what I left you, remember this. I made these decisions while fully aware of my finances, my family, and my wishes." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "I have already prepared evidence in case anyone attempts to accuse you of wrongdoing after my death." I read that line again. Evidence. My grandmother had expected this. She had known my parents might come after the inheritance. But there was more. Attached to the letter was a document from her attorney explaining that the inheritance had been placed into a protected estate structure before her death. My parents couldn't simply demand the money. And then I saw something else. A sealed statement. It contained copies of conversations between my grandmother and her attorney. She had specifically mentioned concerns about my parents pressuring her to change the will. My grandmother had documented everything. She had been preparing for exactly what was happening. But I still didn't know what my parents had accused me of. So I called the attorney. His name was Daniel Brooks. When he answered, I said, "Daniel, the nursing board contacted me." There was a long silence. Then he said, "I was afraid that might happen." My heart sank. "You knew?" "I suspected they might try something." "Who filed the complaint?" Another pause. Then he said, "Your parents." I closed my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't shocked. I was angry. But Daniel wasn't finished. He said, "And there's something else you need to know." Daniel asked me to come to his office the next morning. I barely slept. My entire career was suddenly hanging over my head. Years of education, long shifts, emergency calls, patients I had cared for, families who trusted me. All of it could be questioned because two people wanted money that wasn't theirs. The next morning, Daniel placed a folder on his desk. "The complaint claims you used your position as a nurse to obtain confidential information about patients and redirect property belonging to vulnerable patients." I stared at him. "That is completely false." "I know. They're saying I stole from patients." "That's the allegation." I felt sick. My parents had chosen accusations that sounded serious enough to frighten anyone. But they had made another mistake. They didn't understand how hospitals worked. Every access to patient records was logged. Every medication transaction was documented. Every financial interaction was recorded. There was a trail for almost everything. Daniel knew that. I knew that. My parents apparently didn't. He slid another document toward me. "This is the complaint they submitted." I read it carefully. Some of the details were accurate. Others were distorted. They had mentioned a patient whose family had once given me a gift. They claimed I had accepted something valuable. That was false. The patient had given the hospital a small donation through an official charity program. I had never received personal money from them. Then they claimed I had altered records. Again, false. My father had somehow obtained information about a patient I had cared for. I didn't understand how. Then Daniel pointed to a paragraph. That's the part that worries me. It said that my parents had supporting evidence. I looked up. What evidence? Daniel leaned back. We don't know yet. I felt my anger rising. Then how do I prove something didn't happen? You don't prove a negative, he said. We prove the records. He was right. That afternoon, I contacted the hospital's compliance department. They reviewed my records. Every accusation was checked, every patient file, every medication log, every shift report, every transaction, and one by one, the accusations collapsed. I had done nothing wrong, but then something unexpected happened. The compliance officer found an unusual login to one of my old accounts. Someone had attempted to access information under my credentials. The login occurred on a day I wasn't working. I immediately knew what that meant. Someone had tried to create evidence. The hospital's security team traced the login. It wasn't from my home. It wasn't from the hospital. It came from a computer associated with an outside location. Daniel asked me if I knew anyone who had access to my old passwords. I thought for a moment, then I remembered. My father. Years earlier, he had helped me set up my first laptop. He knew one of my old passwords. I had changed it since then, but apparently not everywhere. Daniel looked at me. Don't confront them yet. Why? Because if they are involved, we need to know how far this goes. For the first time, I understood. This wasn't just a family argument. Someone had tried to build a case against me, and if we reacted too quickly, we might destroy the evidence. So I did something my parents never expected. I stayed quiet. I didn't call them. I didn't accuse them. I didn't tell them what we had discovered. Instead, I let them believe their plan was working. And that decision became the turning point. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice sounded strangely calm. How are things going? I knew exactly what she meant. The board contacted me. She sighed. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I almost laughed, but I stayed silent. She continued. Maybe this is a sign that you should reconsider the inheritance. There it was. Not even a week had passed. My career was under investigation, and my mother was already asking about the money. I said, what do you want me to do? She answered immediately. Give the estate to us temporarily. Temporarily? Yes. Until everything settles down. I asked, and what happens to my inheritance? We'll protect it. That was the moment I knew. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to take control. So I did something difficult. I pretended to consider it. I need time. My mother sounded relieved. Of course. After we hung up, I called Daniel. He said, good, good. You've given them confidence. I didn't like hearing that, but he explained, if they believe you're frightened, they'll keep talking. They'll make more mistakes. And they did. Over the next few days, my parents called repeatedly. My father even offered to meet with me. He told me that if I signed a temporary transfer agreement, everything would be easier. I asked him why he already had an agreement prepared. He hesitated. Then he said, your mother had someone draft something. Someone. That word stayed in my mind. Daniel obtained a copy. It wasn't a temporary protection agreement. It gave my parents broad authority over the inheritance. They wanted control. And they wanted it before the nursing board finished investigating me. That meant they knew I was vulnerable. They were trying to use fear to force me into surrendering money. But there was another problem for them. The nursing board investigation was moving quickly. The hospital had completed its internal review. Every allegation against me had been disproven. The suspicious login had been documented, and Daniel had begun communicating with the board's investigator. Then we found something even bigger. The person who had provided some of the information to my parents was connected to an old financial advisor. My parents had contacted someone who had once worked with my grandmother. That person had given them private financial information. They thought it would help them challenge the will. Instead, it created another trail. Daniel gathered everything: the will, the estate documents, grandma's letters, the hospital records, the suspicious login, the false complaint, the financial communications. Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. "We can do more than defend you." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "We can show intent." I didn't fully understand. He explained that if someone knowingly submitted false claims to damage my career for financial gain, that could become very serious. Suddenly, I saw the entire situation differently. My parents believed they had trapped me, but every move they made was creating evidence, and I decided to let them continue. I stopped answering their questions about the investigation. I stopped telling them what Daniel was doing. When they asked if I was scared, I simply said, "I'm trying to figure things out." They believed me. They thought I was losing. They had no idea that behind the scenes, everything was coming together. 3 weeks after the complaint was filed, I received a letter from the nursing board. The investigation had been completed. The complaint against me was dismissed. There was no evidence of misconduct, no falsified records, no misuse of patient property, no financial wrongdoing, nothing. I read the letter twice. Then I started crying, not because I was surprised, because for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But Daniel told me not to celebrate yet. There is one more meeting. He arranged a meeting with my parents, their attorney, my attorney, and representatives connected to the estate. My parents arrived believing they were about to negotiate. My mother walked in confidently. My father sat beside her. Neither looked worried. Then they saw the documents on the table. The room went quiet. Daniel placed the nursing board's dismissal letter in front of them. My father picked it up. His face changed. My mother looked at me. "You knew?" I didn't answer. Daniel placed another document on the table. The hospital security report. Then another. The login record. Then another. The communication showing that my parents had been seeking control of the inheritance. My father stared at the papers. My mother said, "This doesn't prove anything." Daniel calmly replied, "It proves enough to raise serious questions." Then he placed the final document on the table. It was my grandmother's statement. Her attorney had preserved it before her death. In it, Grandma explained that she feared her daughter might pressure me after her death. She specifically instructed her attorney to protect the estate from anyone attempting to manipulate me through my profession. My mother began to cry, but I wasn't moved the way I thought I would be. For weeks, I had wanted an apology. Now I realized I didn't need one. My father finally looked at me. "We were trying to protect the family." I shook my head. "No. You were trying to control my inheritance." My mother said, "You're our daughter, and Grandma was your mother." That silenced her. I continued, "She trusted you, and when she chose to leave me her money, you decided I had to be punished for it." My father looked down. I told them something I had never said before. "I would have helped you if you had asked." My mother looked up. "What? If you had needed help, I would have helped. If you had been struggling, I would have helped. But you didn't ask me for help. You tried to destroy my career so I would be afraid enough to give you control." No one spoke. Then Daniel explained what would happen next. The false complaint would be documented. The estate would remain protected. My parents would have no authority over it, and if they attempted anything similar again, we would respond immediately. They had expected me to walk into that room begging for forgiveness. Instead, I walked out with my career intact and my grandmother's final wishes protected. But the biggest surprise came 2 days later. Daniel called me on a Friday afternoon. He asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he handed me another envelope. This was supposed to be opened only after the estate dispute was resolved. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting. My hands started shaking. I opened it. "My dear girl," it began, "if you are reading this, Then something happened that I hoped never would. I sat down. The letter wasn't about money. It was about me. Grandma wrote that she knew I had spent most of my life trying to keep peace between people. She knew I often apologized even when I had done nothing wrong. She knew I was afraid of disappointing my parents. Then she wrote something that made me cry. Money can be replaced. Your name can be repaired. But your courage is something nobody should ever be allowed to take from you. She told me she hadn't left me the inheritance because she thought I needed to be rich. She left it because she wanted me to have choices. She wanted me to be able to work less if I ever needed to. She wanted me to help my children. She wanted me to build a future without constantly worrying about whether one emergency could destroy everything. Then came her final instruction. If your parents ever try to make you choose between your family and your dignity, choose your dignity. I folded the letter. For the first time since Grandma died, I felt peaceful. The inheritance was eventually transferred into the protected structure she had created. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy an expensive car. I didn't suddenly change my entire life. I kept working. I kept caring for my patients. But I made changes. I paid off my debts. I created education funds for my children. I started a foundation in my grandmother's name that helped nursing students who couldn't afford their education. And I never again allowed money to become the price of belonging to my own family. My relationship with my parents changed permanently. They eventually apologized, but forgiveness didn't mean giving them access to my life again. I accepted their apology. I didn't give them control. There is a difference. Months later, I visited Grandma's grave. I stood there for a long time. I told her everything. I told her about the complaint. I told her about the investigation. I told her how scared I had been. And I told her that her plan had worked. She had protected me even after she was gone. As I walked away, I realized something. My parents thought the $3.5 million was the most valuable thing Grandma had left me. They were wrong. The most valuable thing she left me was the courage to stand on my own. They tried to use my career against me. They tried to make me afraid. They thought if they threatened the life I had built, I would hand them everything they wanted. Instead, their betrayal exposed exactly who they were. And sometimes, that's the greatest form of justice. You don't have to destroy the people who hurt you. You don't have to become cruel. You don't even have to get revenge in the way they expect. Sometimes you simply stand still. Tell the truth, protect what is yours, and let their own choices expose them. My grandmother understood that. She knew that one day I might have to choose between keeping the peace and protecting myself. And when that day came, I finally understood her last lesson. Family is supposed to protect your future, not threaten it, and no amount of money is worth surrendering your dignity just to keep someone else comfortable.